So this is always a funny Sunday because we've had Christmas Day and we're about to come to the end of the year, thank goodness, but we're not quite there yet. So Christmas Day's finished and the end of the year still ahead of us, and so it's an in-between sort of time. And I wondered what we could think about today in our service. And I thought maybe I should try and answer the question that's probably in everybody's mind right now. What did Jesus look like? So, that's what we'll think about. What did Jesus look like? The Bible doesn't tell us anything about what Jesus looked like, not one thing. And one reason we don't always think about that is because we already know what Jesus looks like, because there's so many pictures that have been done of Jesus and they all follow a common theme. So we know what Jesus looks like. Everybody knows that Jesus had long hair, and he had a beard, and he was tall, and he had blue eyes, and he was handsome, and he wore a white robe. But is that even true? Is that picture that we carry around in our heads an accurate picture of what he looked like? Is any of it accurate? So today, there's a few pictures I want to show you. And it's pictures of some men, and the men in the pictures will all look a bit different. But they're all Jesus, apparently. So the first one has made his appearance, and you've probably seen this picture before. This is a very classic image of Jesus painted by Warner Salmon. And has anyone not seen that picture before? I can see you all putting your hands up and zooming there. I think most people, it's a very, very famous picture. So let's look at another picture. Now that one, you might not be sure you've seen that one before, but that's one of these pictures where it's a very typical picture of Jesus. Jesus the shepherd, he's out there with his white toweling robe and his lamb. And there's lots of pictures like that. Next picture. So that's obviously from a film. Somebody's been Jesus, and again he's got the white toweling robe that lets you know as soon as you see somebody like that, you're thinking that's probably meant to be Jesus. But wait till the next picture. It's controversial. This is another picture of an actor playing Jesus, but the controversy is, look, he's got some brown clothes on there. It's not all white. So they've gone off script, except there never was a script. Now, the next picture is a very important picture. It might be hard to see, but this is the oldest picture ever painted of Jesus. Well, the oldest picture ever painted of Jesus that has been found. And so this picture was painted in the 3rd century, and we can't find any images of Jesus that are older than that. And it was found in the catacombs in Rome. So we don't know who the author, the artist was. But if you can see it, you can just about see this is Jesus as the good shepherd. So he's got the shepherd, he's got the sheep up on his shoulders. There's a couple of sheep round about. And that was an early image of Jesus. And by the way, you would think through art that the most famous pictures of Jesus are Jesus on the cross or the resurrection. But the very first pictures that were painted of Jesus, that was the kind of image that people had of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. So another picture, which is an older picture, but not as old as the one you've just seen, is this one here. And if you look at Jesus, and the face of Jesus there, he does look more Eastern, which of course he was. Now, there's all the ways Jesus has been depicted around the world. So some examples of that come up now. There's an ethnic Jesus. Everyone paints Jesus in their own image, if you like. So even though that man is clearly a black man and Jesus presumably wasn't a black man, immediately you see that image, there's still enough there to make you think, oh, that must be a picture of Jesus. So how about a Japanese Jesus? And how about black Jesus again? How about An Indian Jesus? Or a Chinese Jesus? This picture, by the way, is meant to be the Last Supper. It's an excerpt from the Last Supper. So that's Jesus there with the Last Supper. And how about an African Jesus? So different cultures portray Jesus in their image. And then there's images where the artists want to mold Jesus into a particular kind of person with a particular agenda. And sometimes that's quite clever and it's quite accurate. And then sometimes it's quite offensive, because Jesus can appear in all kinds of guises depending who's painting or making up the picture. So for example, here's rich Jesus. We'll all get rich quick if we believe in Jesus. That's rich Jesus' plan. Or much more recently, here's Republican Jesus. And you can see they've not done very well with the MAGA hat there, because you can see it slightly not really in that guy's head. But there you are, these images are made. Or how about a very different kind of image? Jesus as the freedom fighter, fighting for liberation. Or more controversial still, maybe, here's Jesus getting married. There isn't anything you can't get a picture of Jesus about. That's Jesus getting married there, and I think honeymooning in Hawaii, according to that picture. But there we go. Or how about revolutionary Jesus? And that was used by a Christian group a couple of years. Did Christian Aid use that image at one point? But there was a thing going on at Easter, and there was a campaign a couple of years ago, meek, mild, as if. And then there's Heiki. Now, Heiki is someone you will think you know nothing of, but if you've been to our church when we've had orders of service, sometimes we've had coloured pictures in orders of service, and he's a Chinese Christian who does these amazingly colourful, stylised pictures of Jesus and scenes from the Gospels. But folk have thought about a lot of these pictures and thought, can we get a more accurate picture? What might really look more like Jesus? And so they've come up with different ideas. So these two pictures are trying to get more like what Jesus would really have looked like. So that's two different ideas. We're looking for a bit more darkness in the skin. We're not looking for blue eyes and so on. So that's a couple of ideas. And then occasionally people take a photograph of someone they think would look like Jesus. So this last picture here that's a photograph, so it's clearly not Jesus, but maybe that's the kind of look that Jesus would have had. Now we know, if you see a picture, for example, the Last Supper, Jesus there, who's obviously Chinese, we'll look at that picture and we say, well, obviously Jesus didn't really look like that, because Jesus came from the Middle East, he didn't come from the Far East. But what makes us think that a European white man or an American-looking white man is any more accurate? In the Bible, John the Baptist comes along, and we get a brilliant description about John the Baptist, what he looked like, what he was wearing, what he was like. And then when Jesus comes along, the most important person of all, there's nothing. So let's just think about a couple of the things that we have in our heads about Jesus. One thing is that he wears a long robe, but he wouldn't have worn a long robe. If you go back to the picture in the catacombs, which I think should come next in the slides, this guy's wearing a kind of knee-length tunic. And if you think about it, that's what Roman people used to wear. If you go back to ancient Greeks, that was kind of the style. If you think of a film like Jason and the Argonauts or Hercules or whatever, the kind of clothes they wore were kind of knee-length clothes. The early pictures of Jesus had him in a knee-length robe. By the 5th century, Jesus was wearing a big long robe and they started painting halos around the heads of people who were seen as holy people. So that came along later. Of course, in every age, there's always people who like to show off. There's always folk that want to make a fashion statement. Jesus warned against the teachers of the law who, in his words, loved to parade about in their long robes. Jesus said that in Mark chapter 12. They like to gad about in their long robes, showing off. So if Jesus said that, it's pretty unlikely that he was walking about in a long robe. So Jesus didn't wear a long robe, nor did he wear a white robe. In the Bible, there's the account of the Transfiguration. And it tells us that at that moment on the mountain, the Transfiguration, Jesus' clothes appeared to turn white in appearance. And then at the resurrection, when Jesus was seen at Easter time, we're told that his clothes, his robes, were described as being white. Now, why mention that at all unless it was a change, unless it was different from the usual? But there's another reason why he didn't wear white, and it's the most obvious reason of all, just the impracticality of that. Only somebody who would be obscenely rich would be able to walk about wearing a white robe in that terrain and climate. There's another thing about Jesus' clothes that comes up in the Gospels. We hear that he wore a seamless robe. Now, I don't know what you think about when you hear that phrase, a seamless robe. But I used to think, until very, very recently, I always thought that was a sign of quality. That Jesus, in fact, had a good garment. He wasn't rich. He didn't have a fancy lifestyle. But he had a pretty decent piece of gear that he was wearing, this robe. It was a seamless robe. Because when they were dividing things up, the soldiers at the time of the crucifixion, they wanted to divide up his robe so they could all get a wee piece of the fact, I killed Jesus and here's the proof that I did that. This is a piece of his robe. And they decided not to rip it, to divide it up, because they would have to rip it, they'd have to destroy it. And I thought, oh, that's because the robe was good. It was a seamless robe. But it turns out the seamless robes were the cheap ones. There's a woman called Joan Taylor, and she's a scholar of early Christian origins. And she's recently written a book with the title, What Did Jesus Look Like? She's actually written a book about this. People tended to wear two coverings. There was an inner robe and then an outer robe on top of that. John the Baptist, when he began his teaching, told people, respond to the needs of folk who you meet who are poorer and in need of help. And he said one thing to do. Whoever has two tunics should give one to someone who has none. And it's hard to believe that that's the kind of thing that Jesus would ignore. So it seems that at the time of his arrest, Jesus was wearing one piece of clothing because he'd already given his other tunic to somebody else, someone in need. Most pictures you see of Jesus show him as being very clean and tidy. Would he be clean and tidy? I think there's not much doubt about that. He had no permanent home for a lot of the time. He was always travelling. He was always on the road. He would not have been clean and tidy. Joan Taylor says we should imagine a washing powder advert. Remember these adverts where you'd have before and after? You'd have the same piece of clothing, it's a t-shirt, whatever it is, and you'd have before, and it would not look that good, and then the amazing washing powder, it would look brilliant in the second picture. And she said, if you can picture that with Jesus' clothes, Jesus would have been in the before picture. Jesus' clothes would not have been neat and tidy at all. Okay, so was Jesus handsome then? How about that? Would be interesting to know. Was he a handsome man? He usually is in the depictions. Well, we don't know, but it could be, we could have expected the Bible to say that, if he was particularly handsome, because there are times in the Bible where men are described as being handsome, just as there were women noted for their beauty. Moses apparently was a very handsome man, according to the Bible. The first king of Israel, King Saul, was handsome. King David, the second king, he was handsome too, and his son, Absalom, was also very handsome. But we don't know. We don't know what he looked like. Did he have long hair? Well, there were many men in Israel, and religious ones at that, who did have long hair. They were known as Nazarites. And what they did was they took a time in their life, and it could be years in their life, to spend time studying Scripture. And during the period, they deliberately didn't cut their hair, they just let their hair grow out, and they also abstained from strong drink. Now, we might not have any description about Jesus here, but we do know something about Jesus and strong drink. Jesus was often being criticized for drinking wine, strong drink, at social gatherings. So Jesus definitely wasn't a Nazarite. So did he have long hair? I think the fashion of the time is not clear. Maybe his hair was shorter than what we usually see in pictures. And certainly he would likely have brown eyes, not blue eyes, and he would more likely have darker skin than what we're used to seeing in the pictures. So, does any of this matter? Some. At the end of her book, Taylor says that she was pleased to announce that it would seem that what Jesus probably looked like was consistent with the message that he taught. So I suppose that's quite a nice thing to know. But I guess your reaction to what I'm saying today will range from, oh, this is very interesting, to it's not remotely interesting at all, what we're hearing here. And that's okay. Because much, much more important is who Jesus was, not what he looked like. What he was and is like is the thing that matters about Jesus. We think of John the Baptist as someone who came to introduce someone else. He came to introduce Jesus to the world, get people ready for Jesus. And I think that's fair enough. That's what he did. But in a way, Jesus did the same kind of thing. Jesus came to introduce us to God, to help us understand much more fully what God is like, to introduce the idea of us being in a relationship with God, to let us know that we are all loved by God and that we're called by God to work together to help build a kingdom of love and compassion and justice and kindness. There's a very well-known phrase about Jesus. It goes like this: Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He helps us see what God is like. And it wasn't his face that did that, and it wasn't his clothes, it wasn't his appearance that brought people to God. It was who he was. It was what he said and what he taught, and the life that he lived helped to make God clearer. So over the next weeks and months in Langside Church, and I am certain over the next weeks and months in Newland South Church too, we'll be following the life and the story of Jesus, and we will be reminding ourselves of who he is and why he matters. And we'll be asking God to speak to us all as we retake that path of following in Jesus' steps. So whatever we may make of Jesus' appearance pales into insignificance compared to seeing who he really is. What we really need to learn from him is how we should live, how we should treat each other, how we can play our part in working for God's kingdom in the time and in the place where we are. Thanks be to God.